John Wayne was standing in the middle of the soundstage at Republic Pictures, his massive frame casting a shadow over everyone around him, when he said the words that would start the biggest confrontation of his career. "I don't work with dames who think they're tougher than me," he growled, his voice carrying across the entire set, "especially not some blonde canary who thinks she knows how to make movies." Every person on that set froze. The blonde canary he was referring to was sitting just 20 feet away. Her name was Doris Day, and what happened next would force John Wayne to do something he had never done in his entire career: publicly apologize to a woman. Now I'm going to tell you the story of the day America's sweetheart made Hollywood's toughest cowboy eat his words. The confrontation that shocked an entire industry and proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody expects to fight back. The year was 1959, and John Wayne was at the absolute peak of his power. He was the biggest box office draw in Hollywood, the undisputed king of westerns, and a man who had built his entire career on being tougher than everyone else. Wayne had a reputation for being difficult to work with, especially with actresses. He believed that movie sets were men's territory, and that women should stick to looking pretty and following directions. He had made this philosophy clear on dozens of films, and few people had ever challenged him. Doris Day, meanwhile, was coming off a string of successful romantic comedies and had just signed a deal to star in her first Western, a film called The Ballad of Cable Hogue, where she would play opposite Wayne. The trouble started during the first script reading. Wayne looked at Doris across the conference table and made his feelings clear from the beginning. "I hope you understand, little lady," he said in that distinctive drawl, "that this isn't one of your fluffy musicals. This is a man's picture, and I expect everyone to act accordingly." Doris smiled politely. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Wayne. I'm here to work, just like everyone else." Wayne studied her for a moment, clearly trying to assess whether this sweet-looking blonde was going to cause him any problems. What he saw was a 37-year-old woman in a modest dress, speaking in a soft voice and offering no challenge to his authority. What he missed was the steel in her eyes. The first week of filming went smoothly enough. Wayne dominated every scene, as he always did, and Doris seemed content to follow his lead. The crew relaxed, thinking this would be just another routine John Wayne picture. But Wayne's behavior toward Doris was becoming increasingly condescending. He would cut off her suggestions during rehearsals, ignore her input on character development, and make comments about keeping the little lady happy that were clearly meant to diminish her authority on set. Doris endured this treatment silently for several days, but those who knew her could see the anger building. She had not become one of Hollywood's biggest stars by being a pushover, and Wayne's attitude was pushing her toward a breaking point. The explosion came on a Friday afternoon during filming of a particularly complex scene. Doris had prepared extensively for her character's emotional breakdown sequence, working with the acting coach and studying the script for hours. When they began filming, Wayne kept stepping on her lines, upstaging her in the frame, and generally treating the scene as if it was all about him. After the fifth take was ruined by Wayne's interference, Doris quietly asked to speak to the director. "I think John is playing the scene wrong," she said diplomatically. "His character should be supporting mine in this moment, not competing with it." Wayne overheard the comment and exploded. "Supporting?" he roared. "Lady, I've been making pictures since before you were out of diaper. I don't need some song and dance girl telling me how to act." The entire set went silent. Cast and crew members stopped what they were doing and turned to watch the confrontation. Doris remained calm. "Mr. Wayne, I wasn't questioning your experience. I was making a suggestion about the scene." "I don't want your suggestions," Wayne shot back. "I want you to hit your mark, say your lines, and let the men handle the real acting." That's when Doris Day transformed from America's sweetheart into something John Wayne had never encountered before, a woman who refused to back down. "Miss Wayne," she said, her voice still soft but now carrying an edge that made everyone lean forward to listen. "You seem to be under the impression that because I smile a lot and sing in my movies, I must be some kind of helpless little girl who doesn't understand this business." Wayne smirked. "Well, aren't you?" Doris stood up slowly, and suddenly the 5'7" actress seemed to fill the entire soundstage. "Let me tell you what I understand," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I understand that I've made more money for this studio in the past 5 years than you have. I understand that my last 3 pictures have all been bigger hits than your last 3 pictures, and I understand that right now you're scared. Wayne's face went red. Scared? Of me, Doris replied simply. You're scared that people might notice that I can act. You're scared that I might steal a scene from you. You're scared that audiences might prefer watching a woman who can actually convey emotion instead of just squinting and drawling. The set was completely silent. No one had ever spoken to John Wayne like that. Ever. Wayne took a step toward Doris, his massive frame looming over her. You better watch your mouth, little girl. But instead of backing down, Doris stepped forward to meet him. Or what? She asked. You'll throw a tantrum? Storm off the set? Run to the producers and demand they fire me? Go ahead. See how that works out for you when they realize they'd rather keep the actress who shows up on time, knows her lines, and doesn't terrorize the crew. Wayne was speechless for a moment. In 30 years of making movies, no one had ever challenged him so directly or so effectively. You don't know what you're talking about, he finally managed. Don't I? Doris replied. Let me tell you what I know. I know that your last 3 pictures barely broke even. I know that the studio is worried about your box office appeal with younger audiences. I know that they cast me in this picture specifically to bring in the female demographic that your westerns usually ignore. She paused, letting that sink in. And I know that without me, this picture doesn't get made. So maybe, just maybe, you should start treating me like the professional I am instead of like some decoration you have to tolerate. Wayne stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was trying to think of a response. But for the first time in his career, John Wayne had been outgunned in a verbal showdown. The silence stretched on until the director nervously cleared his throat. Maybe we should take a break. Wayne nodded curtly and walked off the set without another word. For the rest of the day, filming was suspended while Wayne remained in his trailer. Word of the confrontation spread throughout the studio like wildfire. By evening, every major player in Hollywood had heard some version of the story. The next Monday, when filming resumed, Wayne's behavior was completely different. He was polite to Doris, professional in his interactions, and actually listened when she made suggestions about the scenes. But the real shock came 3 days later. Wayne asked to speak to Doris privately in her trailer. She agreed, though she made sure her assistant remained within earshot in case the conversation went badly. Wayne stood in the doorway of her trailer, his hat in his hands, looking more uncomfortable than she had ever seen him. Miss Day, he began, then stopped and started over. Doris, I owe you an apology. Doris looked up from her script, genuinely surprised. Do you? Yes, ma'am, I do. Wayne's voice was quiet, almost humble. I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. And I was wrong to treat you the way I did. He paused, clearly struggling with the words. I've been making pictures for a long time, he continued, and I guess I got used to thinking that my way was the only way. But you showed me something last week that I should have seen from the beginning. What's that? Doris asked. That you're not just some pretty face they brought in to sell tickets. You're a real professional, and more than that, you're right about the acting. You do things with a scene that I never even think about. You make the other actors better just by being there. Wayne shifted uncomfortably. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm sorry for being such a bastard, and I'm asking if you'll help me be better in this picture. Doris studied his face for a moment, looking for any sign that this was some kind of manipulation or trick, but Wayne's expression was completely sincere. John, she said finally, I accept your apology, and of course I'll help you. That's what professionals do for each other. Wayne nodded gratefully. Thank you. And Doris, what you did last Friday standing up to me like that took real guts. I respect. Word of Wayne's apology spread through Hollywood even faster than news of the original confrontation. The idea that John Wayne had apologized to anyone, let alone a female co-star, was almost impossible to believe. But the change in Wayne's behavior was unmistakable. For the remainder of filming, he treated Doris as an equal partner, asking for her input on scenes and actually incorporating her suggestions into his performance. The transformation was so dramatic that other cast members started commenting on it. The director later said it was like working with a completely different John Wayne. It was remarkable. Cinematographer William Clothier recalled years later. John went from treating Doris like she was some kind of nuisance to treating her like she was the most important person on the set, and his acting got better because of it. The finished film was one of Wayne's most critically acclaimed performances in years. Critics noted a new emotional depth in his work, a willingness to show vulnerability that had been missing from his recent picture. Many attributed the improvement to Doris Day's influence, both as a scene partner and as someone who had challenged him to be better. But the real impact of their confrontation went far beyond one movie. Word of how Doris had stood up to John Wayne spread throughout the industry, and suddenly other actresses found the courage to challenge difficult male co-stars. Doris showed us that you don't have to put up with that kind of treatment, actress Janet Leigh said years later. She proved that you could fight back and win if you were smart about it and stood your ground. The incident also changed Wayne himself. For the rest of his career, he was noticeably more respectful toward his female co-star. Directors and producers noticed the change, and Wayne's reputation for being difficult to work with began to fade. John learned something important from Doris. Director Howard Hawks observed. He learned that treating people with respect doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger. Years later, when asked about the incident, Wayne was characteristically blunt about what had happened. Doris Day taught me that I was an ass, he said in a 1971 interview, and she was right to do it. I had gotten too big for my britches, and she cut me down to size. Best thing that ever happened to me as an actor. Doris, for her part, remained gracious when discussing the confrontation. John was a good man who had gotten into some bad habits. She said, sometimes people need to be reminded that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their gender or the type of movies they make. The story of their confrontation became legendary in Hollywood, told and retold as an example of how even the most powerful stars could be held accountable for their behavior. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the film industry itself. Doris Day's willingness to stand up to John Wayne helped establish a precedent that actresses didn't have to tolerate abuse or disrespect from their male co-stars. That moment on the set changed everything. Film historian David Thompson wrote years later, it showed that the old boys club mentality couldn't survive if women were willing to fight back intelligently and persistently. When John Wayne died in 1979, Doris Day was among the celebrities who spoke at his memorial service. In her brief remarks, she focused not on their confrontation, but on the man he had become afterward. John Wayne was big enough to admit when he was wrong, she said, and brave enough to change. Those are the qualities that made him a true hero, on screen and off. The day Doris Day made John Wayne apologize became more than just a Hollywood anecdote. It became a symbol of how courage and professionalism could triumph over ego and intimidation. And it proved that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who refuses to be silenced, even when facing down a legend. John Wayne may have been the king of the cowboys, but on that day in 1959, he learned that even kings sometimes have to bow down to the truth, and Doris Day was the one brave enough to speak it.